Maybe Jean-Marc, for instance, you can switch off the microphone. I think it would be a good start. Thank you. Okay, so I very briefly introduce our colleague Peter. So Peter is affiliated to the Department of Built Environment at Gent, so a high school in Gent, and at the same time is PhD researcher at the Department of Architecture at Leuven, University Leuven, KU Leuven, and its research topics are land policy, the issue, of course, of land take that we are going to talk about, and instruments of land policy. He is a background in engineer because he is an engineer architect from University of Genk. I think Peter had his degree in '96, and then Peter worked for 10 years, I think, for the city of for the municipality of Gent in relation to development of a project. And now, as mentioned, is a lecturer at Gent, but is also still involved in consulting at Veneco development agency in Flanders. So, for a brief introduction, so Peter, we are very happy to have you for this midi du Lepur, and I let you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Marie and Jean-Marc. Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank Lepur for inviting me, and I'm happy that I can present the policy advice I worked on for the Flemish Minister of Spatial Planning. We kind of have the same challenges in Wallonia as in Flanders, and so maybe we can learn of each other's situation and possible solutions. I hope you don't mind. I will be presenting in English because I'm more familiar with these terms in English. So I hope you can follow my presentations, and if not, please add your question in French, and that could work also for me. As Jean-Marie already said, I'm working on a PhD on no nut land take policy in general and specifically for Flanders. And in that way, I worked about now for 3 years on this topic, and I worked with our research group specifically on the measurement of the problem of no nut land take and the problem of oversupply and how we could deal with this. So I will also briefly introduce you to our research results that some of them will be published even today. So what I will show you is very topical, and the policy advice I will go into will be presented to the Parliamentary Commission next Tuesday. So it's all very topical, and that's because the no nut land take policy and especially the compensation problem is very hot topic in the political debate at the moment in Flanders. So I'm happy to share this with you today. I will share my screen so that I can show you some slides. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
All right. So, of course, we have different regional policies, but we have kind of the same background, the same heritage from planning and the binding land use plans dating before 1980. So it's very interesting to compare both situations because I think we have some common problems and how to deal with these binding plans in order to achieve no nut land take, the no nut land take policy as formulated by the European Union and specifically by our region of Flanders and your region of Wallonia. And how can it be achieved in a context of oversupply and binding land use plans? So I guess you are already aware that of the problem Flanders deals with now, namely that we have 1/3 of our area that is taken by a settlement area, 1/3 of it. And well, not only this vast amount of land take is a problem, of course, also the form of it, the scattered form of it in dispersed buildings and urban sprawl is also a problematic dimension of the settlement structure, or a lack of structure, you could say. So 1/3 of the area of the territory is already taken, and the main question is, of course, to what extent will we still tolerate this, and to what extent will this land take evolve by 2040, by 2050? What is the limit that we will set on this extensive land take? Flanders, of course, is one of the highest scoring regions in Europe on land take. Of course, we have a high population density, but, and that's kind of a paradox, we have a low building density. So how can we change this? Well, first of all, the land take rate has been reducing over the past 15, 20 years. It was 10 hectares a day, land take a day, and it reduced to a point of 5 to 6 hectares a day over the past 5 to 10 years. Especially the first period of 2000 and the years later on, there was the policy achieved a significant reduction of land take from 10 hectares a day to 6 hectares a day. But this evolution kind of stopped and stabilized around a level of 6 hectares a day. The first period of 2000 is especially marked by the approval of the structural plan for Flanders, but also also kind of exceptions, building exceptions were cancelled. Also, a ordinance was put down for the reserve zones. Reserve zones for residential development were only still buildable if demographical need was proved. So a lot of measures were taken in this short period, and it had its effects. It had its impact on the land take. But since then, no extra significant measures were taken to reduce land take up to today. The policy of no-net land take, as it is called by the European Union, has different names, also in Flanders. I know of le zero beton, le stop beton. You also have these different kind of names. We also have different terms for it. First, the media came up with the term beton stop, but it doesn't really frames the scope of the no-net land take policy, of course. We still need development, a lot of development, but in another way, of course. So construction will not stop, will not be banned because of a no-net land take policy, of course. Then the government came up with another term, bouwshift, and this is the more official term the Flemish no-net land take policy is known for. It is a shift of construction activity, and we need to shift this construction activity from greenfield development to densification, to land that is already taken, and to a certain point that all development will take place into the existing perimeters of the settlement area and already taken land. But what is remarkable is that in the discourse in Flanders, a lot of emphasis is put on construction, and that construction will be not obstructed, and the emphasis is less on avoiding land take and protecting land. Some exceptions can be made for the discourse done by environmental agencies, and of course, and that kind of stakeholders. But overall, the emphasis of the bouwshift is on construction and less on the initial scope, protecting land, as it is framed by the European Union. So the bow shift, in a way, has two sides, and the two sides of the same coin, but in the discourse, not the same emphasis is put on land versus further construction and protection of land, because, of course, the protection of land is more controversial, more costly, and so on. In the Dutch terminology, especially downzoning is important, or in Dutch herbestemming. But because also this is herbestemming as a term is kind of delicate, and also other instruments can be considered in achieving non-Atlantic, the term neutralisatie or neutralization could be used for this activity of rolling back building rights. I also noticed that in French, in Wallonia, you use the term dézonage. Dezoning in English does not really exist, it's not a proper term, and is only used in terms of deregulation, so getting rid of zoning in a way. So in English, the right term to use is downzoning. So I will use downzoning in my further presentation. But the use of terms is not, of course, is relevant and important, and also shows what kind of emphasis is laid down in the discourse that can differ from Flanders to Wallonia to Germany and so on. First of all, in achieving a no-land take, we need to get the data right. And that was part of the research we've done at Gent with our research group, getting the data right on this problem of no-land take policy versus an oversupply problem. Well, so let's go briefly through some of these definitions that are very important. First of all, settlement area. 1/3 of our regional territory is taken, and so we have a very high level of settlement area. The definition of land take was much discussed within the period we worked with the task force Bouwshift, so the expert panel that was put together by the Minister Demir, and especially the construction sector opposes to this definition. Why? Because the definition of land take, as framed by the European Union, includes also unsealed surface, not only constructed and sealed surface, but also unsealed surface, and is in effect a concept that makes a difference between settlement area and land that is still in agriculture or natural use. So all land in agriculture or natural use that is not taken needs protection under a policy of no-net land take. And this is opposed by some stakeholders as a definition. This why I want to mention this definition question and how also it is measured. The measurement of land take is done by VITO. VITO is a Flemish agency for technological innovation, and they have a department of land survey. And these people measure each 2 to 3 years the land take evolution in Flanders. So according to their last numbers, the land take has an average rate of 5.1 hectare a day during the last measurements that were made. The Dutch term for land take is ruimtebeslag. So again, another emphasis not on land but on spatial occupation. So slightly different than the initial land take, where the emphasis is on soil protection, protection of its agricultural function or natural function. Then with our research group, we introduced an additional term because we had the feeling we needed a new term for a specific Belgian problem. Namely the friction between the zoned land, the oversupply, and the situation on the terrain of agriculture and natural land. We call this term land take risk. This is the risk of the potential risk of zoned land that could be developed in the future. And this can be measured in GIS, because we can combine our land use plans, like you in Wallonia, I guess, and the actual situation on the terrain. So this new term, in Dutch we call it ruimtebeslag risico. This new term, land take risk, is quite important in the approach we developed for the no-net land take policy. And of course, the term planning oversupply is also very important in the Belgian context of achieving no-net land take. The amount of zoned land beyond this target of no-net land take is in fact the planning oversupply for the future. The term of ruimtebeslag of land take is described in a document of the department, the Flemish department, and this scheme is joins it and it shows what can be understood on the land take, namely constructed area, but also unsealed surface like gardens and so on, that goes along with dwellings, companies and so on. So the no land take situation is of course the part of the agricultural use and land still in natural state. And the friction between this state of on the terrain versus the binding plans, this is of course the main friction we have to achieve the no-net land take in Flanders. First thing we've done with our task force Bouwshift last year was to ask this Flemish agency, Vito, where the land take is positioned in compared with the land use zoning in our country, in our region. Well, and to our surprise, according to these data of Vito, more of half of it is in our agricultural zone. We already knew that for a very important share this would be the case, but that it would be more than half of it was quite surprising to us. So you could say that most land take takes place in zones that were not planned for it. So these in yellow you can see the agricultural zone, and the buildable zones are the ones here. So only 1/4 of the land take in Flanders is in residential zones, a fewer share in public services zones, then a share in economical zones and the harbor areas, and a slight smaller share in recreational zones. But the zones, especially agriculture, and for a smaller part also natural reserve and so on, the larger part of the land take are in these open area zones. So that is very important, of course. First, in order to tackle the problem of land take, you need to know what the drivers are of this land take and where this land take takes place. So once we had more insight in these data, it became clear that in order to achieve no-net land take for Flanders, we need to take care of the oversupply problem of these buildable area, but also take care of the land take reduction in agricultural zones. The Bouwshift in agricultural zones is in a way in the same way important as reducing the oversupply of the planning zone. So some interesting research is done on this topic over the past years in Flanders. For instance, the province of Antwerp made a very interesting study on this development in agricultural zones, and what they found was that to a large extent this is caused by outzoned development. So development of residential areas, development of companies, all kind of developments that were not planned in agriculture zone, but are possible because of our Flemish decree. So this Flemish decree allows a lot of out-zoned development, and this reaches a point that this is not a phenomenon anymore that is marginal, but it has become a structural problem. For instance, for the province of Antwerp, nowadays 1/3 of the agricultural zone, the zones here in grey, is taken by other development than agricultural use. And all the black dots you can see on this map are buildings without an agricultural function, although they are situated in the agricultural zone. So this is quite an extreme example of this phenomenon. For overall in Flanders, 15% of agricultural zone has not anymore an agricultural function. So, but this is a more extreme example of it for the province of Antwerp. This phenomenon is not only caused by construction and land take by construction or soil sealing, but also by gardens. For instance, here you can see a cutout of the map I showed for Antwerp. In grey, you can see the zoning of agricultural lands. In black, the constructions, and in red, the gardens. So these gardens are adjacent to the construction and are even to a larger extent causes to a larger extent this land take from agricultural use. And that's why in the numbers, in the data, the tackling the land take in agricultural zone in Flanders is as even important as tackling the problem of oversupply. And this is a problem, a dimension of the bouwshift that is not yet well known to on this moment and not well studied. So in our policy advice for the minister, we put a whole chapter about this phenomenon and how to deal with it in the future in the text. Of course, the problem of oversupply is also an important dimension of the bouwshift, of the known Atlantic, and some municipalities have a vast amount of oversupply, especially with this so-called reserve residential zones, woonuitbreidingsgebied called in Dutch. So these reserve zones for some municipalities are extreme large. So how can we deal with this? Well, what we did with our research group is to measure this problem. How large is the problem, the amount of oversupply for Flanders? The first data came from the department, the Flemish department, and they published it in some 5 years ago. And to their according to their numbers, the land take risk mounted up to 78,000 hectares spread out over Flanders with diverse types of buildable areas, of buildable zones. So we started off with this data, but we saw that this methodology that was used was not optimal, and so what we did was we did a new measurement and a more actual measurement of the same problem, the measurement of oversupply. More data can be found on our website, but what we found was that actually the land take risk on land is rather 60,000 hectares. Why this quite different number? Well, what we found was that in the previous measurement, water bodies were also taken in account as land take risk, and there was also a lot of slivers and that kind of GIS phenomenon that we got rid out of, so that we could focus more on the real risk and the amount of it. So we found that actually 60,000 hectares in Flanders have a buildable zoning, and these lands are still in agricultural or in natural state. Then in a second step, we made a kind of differentiation of this land take risk to see whether of what kind of zones this oversupply is composed by. So what we found was that more or less 1/3 of it is in residential zoning, including these reserve zones. So only 1/3. And the other types of zoning, buildable zoning, are recreational, economical zones, green areas, and public services. According to the definition made by the Flemish department, also parks are a buildable area. You could have a discussion about this, and of course this was part of the discussion in the task force Bouwshift, but in fact the department regards parks also as buildable area. But only 1/3 of it is actually residential zone, and that is quite remarkable because a lot of the debate about the Bouwshift in Flanders is about these residential zones, but actually we need to consider also the other zones where buildings, construction, sealing is possible. So once we got the data right and more actual, we can go into the target and setting the targets, because of course each country, each region can set and defines it differently. Of course, there is an overall European context of non-Atlantic that was defined by the European Union in 2011. And since then, some member states, European member states, and some European regions like Wallonia as well, or Germany, have set a non-Atlantic target. Europe asked the member states to achieve this non-Atlantic by 2050, and this was also the starting point for the Flemish Bouwshift. So what happened was in 2016, in the first document that was made on the topic, Witboek BRV called, this concept was for the first time put forward in Flanders. But the target was set by 2050. And this met a lot of criticism because, of course, taking the high rate of land take in account in Flanders and already the high level of settlement area, how would Flanders look like in 2050? So the minister decided in the next step, in the next document, to be a bit more ambitious and put the target on 2040. And this document was made in 2018. It is the Strategic Vision BRV. But something else happened that we're still struggling with to achieve the non-Atlantic for policy for Flanders. Because in the same year, 2016, a plan was put forward to protect the downzone forests in Flanders. And what happened was this met, of course, a lot of protests by landowners, owners, and so on. And only after a few days of public inquiry, the Minister-President of Flanders withdrew the plan. And it was politically decided that more compensation is needed if we want to downzone furthermore in Flanders. And since then the debate on non-Atlantic, the Bouwshift in Flanders, concentrates mainly on this problem of compensation and not anymore on the spatial targets, or less on the spatial targets. So in 2018, a no compensation scheme was put forward in a draft decree. It was not approved. In 2020, the next version was put forward. It was not approved yet. And last year, an amendment decree was a new attempt to approve this compensation scheme. But in last year, again, this also met a lot of protest and criticism, not from landowners, of course, but this time from municipalities, from experts, from environmental organizations, and so on, because it was told of all feared that this compensation scheme would make the whole operation of bouwshift unaffordable for the taxpayer and the government. So in the documents, the last documents that were approved by the Flemish government, 2 targets were put forward. One is the reduction and achieving no land take by 2040. And the second one, also very important and linked to the previous one, is the target of soil sealing. And the soil sealing needs to be reduced. So not a status quo, not a no-net loss, but a reduction by 20% in rural areas by 2050. So this is also an important instrument that could help achieving no-net land take. So by desealing, by reducing sealed area and demolishing constructions and so on. So this is a very important instrument that could also play an important role in achieving the bouwshift. So by the end of last year, with a panel of experts, we made this expert report. It is also online. It's put online. You can read. Unfortunately, it's completely in Dutch, but I will prepare a paper in English about it within some months. But anyway, this policy advice will be presented next week to the Parliamentary Commission, and we will see what the Flemish minister will do with it. I will briefly go through the main ideas that are put into this expert advice. Well, first of all, what we did was we needed to update the target, because the first target was set in 2016 and shows a no-net land take reduction first to 2050, and later on it was moved to 2040. So this is the last graph made by the Flemish government on achieving the no-net land take, the bouwshift. So what we needed to do is, we are already 5 years later, a lot of land take was added to the settlement area, so we needed to update this target, but without reducing the ambitions, of course. And still, the point of zero beton by 2040 is maintained, and also the intermediate milestone of 3 hectares a day is maintained in the scheme. And also what we did was update the level of land take as measured by Vito. So we need to reduce 5 hectares to 3 hectares within three years, just in 3 years, and then slightly reduce it till a point of land neutrality by 2040. The measurement and the graph is very interesting also because mathematically it shows the amount of area that still can be used, still can be developed in the coming years, but also sets a limit to it. So if this graph is mathematically developed, you could say that there is a limit of 16,000 hectares for overall Flanders in the coming years till 2040, and then of course it stops. No additional land take is allowed anymore. So this gives an idea of the limit that is set by this graph. In a further step, we diversified this graph by making it more specific for the zones that are buildable and the non-buildable zones. So the 16,000 hectares could be split up between 10,000 for the buildable and 6,000 for the agricultural and the natural area. The 6,000 is quite ambitious because of this old zones development, and we need to reduce to ban them in a very short period. And if the Flemish government would be able to do so, we could make a quick win and achieve the point, the intermediate milestone of 3 hectares a day by 2025. But we need to tackle especially this phenomenon of outzoned development. And then, of course, the oversupply problem needs to be tackled, and so on. And also reduction of the agricultural activity in land take needs to be reduced in a more slight way. But a quick win, a faster phase is needed by 2025. Also, we made a breakdown of this oversupply problem, and we found that, in fact, about 30,000 hectares at least needs to be downzoned of this oversupply. At least 30,000 of this buildable land needs to be neutralized or downzoned. 20,000 is less vulnerable because these are these green areas, recreational zones, and so on. And 10,000 of the buildable areas could be developed, preferably in the villages and in the urban areas, of course. But at least 30,000 needs to be downzoned. So how can this be done? That was also a research question the minister put forward for the task force, and we developed a kind of a strategy and a roadmap from now till 2040. What we done is this: we took the same graph of reduction of land take, and we differentiated kind of different phases for policy, different policy phases that could be rolled out, and we suggested different measures for each phasing. So, of course, in only the remaining 3 years till 2025, a lot of measures needs to be taken to implement the bow shift as it was put forward by the Flemish government. And of course, we are losing time also. Also, what you could see on this graph are 3 key milestones that we defined in the roadmap. In Dutch, it is called the first milestone, planologische neutraliteit, zoning neutrality. The second milestone is klimaatneutraliteit, climate neutrality of land use, and the last one is the spatial neutrality, the land neutrality, ruimteneutraliteit. So these 3 milestones need to be reached in order to reach the point of zero beton by 2040. So these milestones are very important and need to be combined in a timeline. First of all, as soon as possible, Flanders needs a zoning neutrality. As I understood already, Wallonia has one, a ban on an additional buildable area. It makes no sense that we need to downzone and municipalities and other governments are at the same time adding new zones. So we need to put forward this principle of zoning neutrality as soon as possible. Still in Flanders, additional zones are added to the land use plans. Then by 2023, all member states need to put forward their target for 2030. And this was approved by the EU Soul strategy last November. So this is also the case for Wallonia. Then 2025, this is a Flemish milestone. We want to reduce land take to 3 hectares a day. And so this is part of the Flemish strategy. Then European-wise, also a milestone is set. The land use needs to be carbon neutral. And the so-called LULUCF ordinance, an ordinance that is mandatory for all member states. And also this intermediate goal that is set here needs to be achieved. And then, of course, for Flanders, 2040 is the milestone for the no net land take neutrality, the no net land loss. Europe have set forward 2050 as a goal. What could be the first steps towards 2025, so in the coming years? As I said before, the zoning neutrality is a very important first step. The ban on out-zoned development could have an important impact on the reducement of land take without any further costs for the government and the taxpayer. This is also important to stress that. Then, as proposed by the European Union, an introduction of the principle, the basic principle of land take hierarchy. I will go into this later on. Then a freeze of all vulnerable zones that are under pressure on land take risk, and this in anticipation of downzoning. So in order to protect them, an amount of 11,000 hectares needs protection as soon as possible. These are forests, wetlands, flooded areas, and so on. This could be the first phase, but if these land take plans will need a lot of time to be developed and public inquiry and so on, it is better to freeze them in one decree, in one decision, and then going forward with the downzoning, for instance, in thematic series. That was at least our proposal. Series that could be, for instance, flooded areas, a series of forests, a series of wetlands, and so on. Because of the strategic importance for climate and nature policy, our proposal is that the Flemish government should work on this, and not the regions, not the municipalities. Then also Flanders needs a regional dialogue with the provinces and the municipalities for a further additional downzoning of 18,000 hectares. The principle of land take hierarchy is defined in the document of the European Union, and for each decision, also on a permit-wise level, should take into account that avoiding, reusing, minimalizing, and compensating land take should be taken into account. The potential of downzoning for 30,000 hectares is measured by our research group. This is the visualization of this potential, and as you can see, it is spread out over the whole territory of Flanders, with some concentrations in the province of Limburg and also the Flemish harbors. What we also did was a qualitative analysis based on this GIS survey. And we found out that still 2,000 hectares of flooding areas are on the risk of land take on building. 7,000 has high natural value, 8,000 have high ecosystem value, and about 2,000 hectares has high landscape value. This is a total of more than 11,000 hectares. And an additional 15,000 hectares were found in the GIS survey of rural open areas. These are mainly, this is mainly land used by for agricultural use. During our task force and the preparation of the task force advice, we had two floodings. Of course, the main one in July that also struck Wallonia hard, but also in November we had another flooding in another part of Flanders. So this is a very urgent topic that we need to deal with, because otherwise more buildings, more houses, more companies will be affected by this flooding phenomenon. So, and to conclude, what kind of instruments can be put forward to reduce this oversupply? Of course, the compensation scheme, as you know, it also in Wallonia still exists in Flanders. It was revised several times, but the core of it is still the same. We pay for compensation of lands that is adjacent to a road, in full surface in the case of non-residential land, and it is for a fixed, very variable sum, because it is the initial value the owner paid for the land. Our estimate, and we will publish this exactly today, our report is published today, shows this estimate of 6.6 billion euros in the current system. In the new system that is put forward by the Flemish government, it can shift from 31 billion to 2 billion euros because the 13 valuation factors defined in the draft decree are not evolved and are not defined in a proper way. So it can be defined in a very generous way for the landowners or in a very strict way. So we're not sure yet to what extent compensation would be needed in a new system. Although compensation costs a lot of money, still there are, it is rare, but there are municipalities in Flanders that are doing downzoning at this moment. I am also advising some of them from the organization, the Intercommunale Vinico, an intercommunal, as you know it also in Wallonia, responsible for 20 municipalities. Well, after a session, a workshop session, 4 municipalities decided to start off with downzoning, and 3 of them succeeded so far. The 4th is finalizing their downzoning. In total, downzoning of 300 hectares is established by these 4 municipalities on their own budget, not on the budget of the Flemish government. And this is to spare open landscape and so on, of course. Could other instruments be considered? Of course, if compensation is too costly for the government and the taxpayer, we should consider other instruments as much as possible. What could help there is using value capture to balance compensation. Of course, this is opposed by a construction sector, but there are different ways to capture value. We could also reduce density to a minimum, but in fact, this is not really avoiding land take, it's more reducement of ceiling and construction. We could also work with development obligations and partial protection of land as compensation, as a charge publique, you could say, with or without the transfer of the land to the municipality. We could also work with transferable development rights, although it's a very complicated instrument. And only it would work if there is a net reduction, not just shifting around some surface, zone surface. So these are more suboptimal solutions compared to a downzoning. A more interesting instrument could be a large-scale acquisition of land and land recovery, because this could balance additional land take and still achieve no net land take. So in case of large-scale acquisition, land recovery, rewilding, we could balance additional land take with this and still achieve no net land take. So this is also an interesting instrument, especially if Flemish government is prepared to pay a lot of money, compensation money. Maybe this would be a better spent budget. And to conclude, of course, we could consider the expiry of the binding land use plans, or the expiry of the compensation rights, as our German neighbors do. Only pay off for compensation rights within a certain period of time. For Germany, this is 7 years. If a change is done on the land use plans within 7 years, market value compensation is paid. Over 7 years, well, no compensation is due to landowners. These landowners had enough time to realize the zoning. Why should we pay for zoning that is already more than 40 years old? And this is a very fundamental question we need to ask. So to conclude, 3 important tracks to work on for a no-net land take policy in Flanders: reducing the land take in agricultural zones. This is without any costs for government and the taxpayer. The downzoning, the more complicated problem of downzoning the buildable areas and protecting nature forests, flooding areas that are at risk. And of course, the counterpart, the densification, of course, of further densification in a sustainable way of our urban areas and villages, so that also our buildings are renewed and new companies and dwellings also have enough space to be developed in. So all sectors, all societal stakeholders and all levels are involved in reaching the Northern Atlantic. For further reading, you can find more on these reports on our website. Also the report of the Task Force Shift. Unfortunately, they were all in Dutch. But if you have any further questions, I will be happy to take them. And you also can email me later on if you want on this email address.
Very good. Thank you, Peter, for this presentation. Very interesting presentation, and at the same time, I think it's raising many questions. I think we can take time maybe to discuss further. So I propose that people in the audience can use the hands, and then we can give them the floor if they want to ask a question or maybe to give reactions to your proposals. I cannot see any hands right now. I have a lot of questions, so it's not really much a problem. But maybe I can start with what you finished with this idea of expiration of compensation rights. Have you proposed this already to the regional authorities, or do you plan to propose this? Do you think it's possible to hear it for the authorities, this reduction of compensation rights? I mean, the idea is that it probably would be just the end of some political careers of your minister or of your deputies. So maybe can you develop this idea?
Yes, it's a very important idea that could reduce the cost of downzoning, of course. This idea was put forward by a legal expert last year, and but in the context of new land use plans. So what he done was proposed an expiry date of compensation right for new land use plans. So this was approved of by a lot of political parties, but we will see whether it will be adopted in the decree. But for the existing land use binding plans, of course, a different view that the politician had on. So the expiry of compensation rights is, to my opinion, a solution that would be used by our neighboring countries. Also, the Netherlands would do so, and they have this concept, this notion of foreseeability. We announce the expiry. For the landowner, the downzoning is foreseeable. So he has a last chance to develop this zone. If he does not do so, then the dezoning will be done without any compensation due. So this is in fact a very important instrument that can be used. So this will be one of the proposals we will do at the Parliamentary Commission indeed. Another way to reduce compensation, also part of our proposal, is to take the new notion in account, namely the development chance. What is the chance this land will be developed? And to make kind of a forfait of it. For instance, our estimates of chance of development of residential zones in Flanders till 2040 is only 39%. So what you could do is pay off for the 39% and spread it out over all landowners. So that is kind of solidarized, this compensation. This is another way to reduce the financial impact of compensation. The expiry date, that's kind of a counter critique to the expiry date. has the problem or the risk that a rush on land could be organized. And that suddenly a lot of owners in last attempt try to develop land or withdraw it from agricultural in natural state, even in gardening and so on. So that is kind of a risk with an expiry date set on compensatory rights. So but still the Flemish government is focused on the financial compensation, and the Liberal Party last week even has put forward an own proposal. They propose to make a compensation fund for the coming years and pay off for this compensation. But, and that is quite remarkable and interesting, this met also a lot of criticism, especially by other taxpayers, of course, asking this Minister Somers, why such an amount of money should be paid not to change anything on the terrain, and if this budget couldn't be used in a better way for buying natural reserves, paying off for renovation, and so on and so on. So his proposal has met a lot of criticism as well, of full compensation.
Okay, very interesting, thank you. So maybe I can mention that, as I think it was precise earlier, that people can ask questions even if they don't want to speak English, and they can do it in French as well. But I see now we have a hand from our Flemish colleague, Cobb Bousseau. So Cobb, I let you the floor.
Okay, hello. Yes, thank you, Peter. I found it very interesting. Yes, of course, I'm not working at the University of Liège, but at the VUB, as you may know. So I wonder, to what extent do you think it would be feasible to to have this compensation for landowners paid by the minority that will still build on greenfield land? For example, imposing a specific dedicated tax on new construction on formerly unbuilt land that would be used to remove the development rights from the land that is owned by those who do not plan to develop. Would that be an option, or not at all? Or are there examples of it? Or
there's also an interesting instrument that can be considered, absolutely. The first idea to balance the compensation cost was to capture the value of densification and planning gains. And this was criticized by the construction sector because they reason in another way. They say, if you want to achieve the bow shift, the no-nat land take, don't tax densification, because densification is part of the solution. Another option is the planning gain, but if we evolve towards zoning neutrality for Flanders, that is very needed for, we won't capture a lot of planning gain, of course, in additional zoning. So indeed, the taxation of unsustainable development as kind of an impact fee, an environmental impact fee, could help to pay for the compensation side. And we are considering to calculate also this scenario now that we have made this GIS survey and also evaluated the costs of this downzoning problem. We could also make a calculation of an impact fee. How high should this impact fee be to compensate, to alter the compensation costs, and in a way achieve a budget neutral solution? But because to my feeling, to my impression, people don't understand why we should pay compensation. The broader public doesn't understand why we should do so. So every solution that is budget neutral would be better, of course, than a strict compensation scenario with public budgets. weighs a lot on the public budget. We all know also that neither the municipalities, neither the Flemish government have this amount of budgets to pay for the non-Atlantic. The municipalities I showed you are currently working on the existing scheme of compensation that is still affordable. So they are willing to pay for 2-3 million euros to downzone these reserve zones. But not all municipalities will be able to do so. But if this cost for each municipality, and we have kind of 300 municipalities in Flanders, are willing to pay 2 to 3 million euros, then a lot of the downzoning could also be done. But of course, our main problem is the leveling up of the compensation costs. That's it. Yeah? But a lot of the downzoning could be done with the current scheme. Our problem in Flanders, of course, is that politically, achieving the non-Atlantic goal has been linked to leveling up this compensation scheme, and now we're like in a lock-in situation at the moment. How can we get out of this lock-in situation? This is the main concern for the minister now, I think. So I'm very curious what she will do with the different elements of the advisory note we made.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So the impact fee is certainly an interesting instrument that we should consider, because we're taxating the right target, to my opinion. We're doing two things at the same time: de-encouraging unsustainable development and composing a budget to pay off for compensation on other spots in the region.
Okay.
Maybe I would like maybe to ask about the municipalities. You just mentioned the municipalities. Your presentation was, I think, very complete for the 40 minutes available, but you did not so much talk about municipalities. For instance, if you take the figures you have given, passing from 5 to 3 in only a few years, in 3 years' time, I mean, the municipality, they have to agree with this already sharp evolution. So I wonder if you could maybe discuss more on what do think the municipalities about this problem and how they might evolve in the coming years.
Well, the municipalities were also part of the task force Booshift, because they had a lot of criticism on this decree that was proposed by the Flemish government on compensation. So this time the municipalities were also addressed and were part of the task force, and their main concern is this compensation, the compensation cost, but they were not opposed to changing these outzone developments and putting a ban on the outzone developments. Only the construction sector was opposed to letting go of this outzoned development. Also, the agricultural sector asks for this ban on outzoned development. So first of all, the Flemish government came up with these exception rules that we need to get rid of. So the Flemish government can cancel these exception rules, and it can have an important impact on the rate of land take without any cost and without the municipalities to do anything about it. If the Flemish government does not go forward with these exceptions and get rid of these exceptions, then the municipalities, because of subsidiarity, could do the same in a municipal ordinance to a certain extent. But we hope that the Flemish government will agree on our proposal to get rid of these exception rules, because if so, we can reduce the land take level to 3 hectares, because the difference between 5.1 now and the 3 is mainly outzoned development phenomena.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands. Maybe I can raise some.
Well, there was a question of Jean-Marc.
Jean-Marc?
Yeah, 40% for for the Wallon situation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What also is very important is the GIS measurement of this, because it is a spread out phenomenon, and we saw that in the survey done by Vito, there are some uncertainties and things that need to be clarified in the measurements. So we will see in the coming years how these measurements evolve, but at this time they are the most accurate that are available for Flanders. So indeed, so these gardens, these back gardens, are like a spillover effect. So what happens is these farms are bought by ordinary people or families or companies, and then they convert the adjacent agricultural land they bought together with the house or the stables, and they convert it into gardens. So this garden phenomenon is also very important, and this was criticized by the construction sector, because this is not really land take in the strict sense of the term. But in fact, they do not take into account that the whole idea of non-Atlantic is also the preservation of agricultural surface. This is essential. They only focus on sealed, unsealed, and is the land still permeable for rain and so on. But in fact, the whole idea behind the non-Atlantic is preservation of the surface of agricultural lands and the surface of nature. And they don't take this into account in their discourse. So like tackling the outzoned development could be a quick win politically for the Flemish government and could have a large impact in very short notice. And now they're debating among the majority parties about this proposal we made.
Thank you. So again, I don't see new hands. Maybe I will briefly conclude with a few ideas in relation to Wallonia. As you mentioned, this topic of down zoning is not so acute in the Netherlands or in Germany, and the same in France. In France, they just do not hesitate to down zone. So that relates to our cultural consumption of property right in this country, I would say. So that shows we still have strong common points in both sides of the language border. So in this perspective, I really much appreciate this midi du Lepur, and it shows clearly that we still need to better probably cooperate between Flanders and Wallonia, because we have this common past and this common heritage, which is not, as shown today, not so easy to manage. So that would be maybe a first point I would like to raise in the conclusion. And I also would like to say that concerning the Walloon figures, some people sometimes consider, as you show for Flanders, that there is a decrease of land consumption, of land take, but then you clearly show that now there is a kind of plateau, and it's difficult to carry on this decrease. So probably with now new and I would say strong policies, we just will not be able to reach the objective. Could be in Flanders, it also would be in Wallonia. So it won't be just it won't be possible to do it just the usual way we still work nowadays. So I think it's important for some people to realize that that we definitely have to change. We have definitely to change the policies. And also, I was very interested by your conclusion concerning the agricultural zones, and also concerning the importance of considering soil, land. That's two different things. So again, it shows that we have lots of work to achieve this. I wouldn't say this objective, but those reflections on this land and soil, and about this reduction in consumption of new resource. So again, thank you very much for this, I think, very stimulating presentation and exchange. And so I propose to finish this Midi du Lepur. Thank you one more to all participants.
I take the opportunity to announce the next Midi du Lepur. It will take place on March the 24th, and it will be about a presentation of some CPDT research results about downzoning by Pierre-François Wilmot, our old colleague. Yeah.
Okay. So we continue on the same team, and we go deeper on this issue of downzoning. Exactly what I said concerning the problem we have in common in Flanders and in Wallonia. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.